Ryan, as a chief marketing officer, you probably hit this tons of time. We're helping founders. How do I know if people really want my product? And I hear this, they explain to me, and founders have told me the story. We hear polite interest, but not real commitment, like money or time. They give us all the right signals. They say yes. And then when it comes to signing on the dotted line, they're like crickets. Nobody wants to even get into an LOI or take my next meeting.
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
I know if people really want my product, Ryan?
Well, unfortunately, that's a bad question. It's a
Mm,
bad question because if you're already at the point where you have a product and you're not sure if people want it, you've probably missed some steps along the way, right?
ouch,
So,
ouch.
yeah, I mean, right. This would imply to me that you didn't do the mom test, you didn't interview customers, you didn't validate the problem, you didn't understand the severity of it. You picked a non-quantified problem, for example. Maybe you did talk to customers and they were like, yep, that happens to me. Yep, that happens to me. Yep, that happens to me. And you're like, well, here's the product that fixes it. And you're like, yeah, I don't really care about fixing it. Or based on the amount of time, money, effort it would take, I'd rather just not solve it. Right. I think if people don't want your product, they're not buying your product, they're dragging their feet when it comes time. A couple things. You're either not clearly communicating the value you provide, right? Or you're communicating in a way that they don't see themselves in that value. Right. We've talked about my three pillars of marketing. I'll run through them: marketing, communication really quick.
Sure.
Reflection of current state, right? So I got to show them, here's where you are today. And they've got to go, yes, I see me in that. Then you got to show them in the transformed state. And they have to go, wow, that looks amazing. I'd like to be that. And then you have to show them the pathway between those 2 points. And they have to go, I can do that. I can afford that. I believe it will work. So sometimes we're just not hitting on all three of those pillars. We might show them in their current state. They're like, are you suffering with mountains and mountains of paperwork, right? And then we show them in future state. Do you wish you no longer had your job? No, I want my job. I want my security. It's like, if you tell them like, we've got an AI that'll replace everything. And they're like, me too. Right. So we have to have a future state they actually care about. Sometimes we miss the future state. Most often we actually miss the current state. They don't believe it's for them, or they don't believe they're capable of it.
That goes to your point, Ryan. If we have to ask this question and you're at this point in time, you've skipped steps now that you triggered this is like, okay, yeah, because, I pulled this from the internet, Reddit, actually, in terms of the general thing that people are complaining
It's
about.
funny. I don't smell the angst.
Yeah. But I've taken that all out just for the benefit of our audience.
Thanks.
But you're talking to them and maybe they're just being polite to you because they want you out of their office or they want to stop that conversation. They don't want to hurt your feelings. And so you take that as a signal, but being polite and saying, yeah, I'd be interested versus having to sign on the dotted line and spend time or money, totally different thing.
Totally different things. Right? We talk about this a lot in terms of raising funds, right? Investor feedback. Investor feedback isn't usually like this ham-fisted, like, no, we don't like your deal. Get out of my office, right? That's not usually what it looks like. It's like, oh, this looks very interesting. We're really compelled by this. If this was true or that was true, we might be more likely. So they're polite. They're nice about it. They give you some like bone to go chase. And then like a good dog, you run out of their office and go look for it, right? Why? Because what is their interest in being honest and harsh and telling you no, disappointing you, making you sad, making you angry, whatever that reaction is going to be, as opposed to being cool and sending you on your way so you don't waste any more of their time, right? So if somebody shows interest, it's important to understand how that interest aligns with action.
Gotcha. Yep.
Typically, how we'll connect this is if we've done all the things we're supposed to, if we've mom tested this thing, we will have asked, what your problems are. What have you done to solve them, right? What precipitated? One of my favorite questions is, what were you doing right before you decided to solve this, right? That tells me a lot about what state were they in before they decided they needed to take real action.
But
right?
you're not pitch slapping them with the solution. You're learning about what state they're in, the current state of the problem.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm pre-product, if I'm at the stage where I should be doing the mom test, I don't have a product yet. I shouldn't. I'm just asking. I'm just learning. I'm learning what I should build. If I've already built the product and I don't have answers to these questions, there's a good chance we built the wrong product. There's a very high likelihood we've built the wrong product, or we're communicating incorrectly, both in the current state of the user, the future state they want to be in, or the pathway to get in there, right? Some of that's going to be off because we're guessing at the language. We have decided for them how they feel, what they want to be when they grow up, and how to get there, right? As opposed to asking them. If we know what precipitates the need and what precipitates the action, we've got a really good chance. And again, let's assume that our product actually does align with it. Let's pretend for a minute all that other stuff was right. And we're just in a position now where we're pitching this thing and we're getting polite responses, but now we're not getting purchases. One of the first things you look at is are you talking to the right people? One, right? Are you approaching the right ICP? Did you validate that correctly? If you did, then I'm going to go back to what I said a minute ago, which is now we need to look at what turns interest into action, because the two are not the same thing. Oh, I really like your idea. Cool. Pay me for it. Oh, I don't like it that much. I don't need it that much.
Right.
Or my quantification of the problem in the way I see it is less than what you charge to solve it. Right. I'm never going to pay more for something than I believe the value of the solution is. Right. So at that point, you have to ask yourself, right? Like, is there something I can do to better demonstrate the value? Is there something I can do to help them quantify that? Or is there something I can do to make sure that I've identified people at the early stage who are in that state, whatever that state was? That's why I asked that question. Like, what was going on? Like, what was happening when you decided to buy that previous solution? When I'm asking about the previous ways they've tried to solve the problems, because that's what I want to understand. I want to say, like, okay, you've used competitor, great, and you're still dissatisfied. That's great. But there's another really important piece of information, which is, why did you choose to use the competitor in the first place?
Exactly. Yep.
That's that precipitation. That's the moment where they said, this has become so severe that the cost of trying to solve it is less than the cost of suffering through it. I want to find lots more people who are in exactly that state.
Let me add to that. Also, if you ask them, how have you tried to solve the problem in other ways? What have you tried? What didn't work? Will actually show you the actions that they are willing to take, not just how painful it needs to be before they take action, but what actions they're willing to take. And that's going to inform how you can position your product to be as actionable, like ease them into what action it takes, which is going to just help with selling altogether.
100%. When you combine those two things, like what they're willing to do with what got them to that point of willingness in the first place, you're in a really, really interesting spot from a marketing perspective, right? Then the challenge becomes, how do I identify more people who those two factors are true for? Not uncomplicated, but at least you know the needle you're looking for in the haystack.
Let me summarize. How do I know if people really want my product? I'm going to try to summarize this for you, Ryan, and then you add, because I want people to take actions away. I really like your framework to move from polite interest to actually getting commitment. First, you want to be asking these questions before you have a product, but let's just add, generally speaking, if you can figure out the current state and be able to describe it to them so they relate, and then give them a future state that they get excited about, and then really show them the value and reduce the, I'm going to call it activation energy, the friction. However, by explaining to them, these are the steps that you can take from going from current state to future state, you can figure out what you need to move them from, I'm just politely interested, to actually taking action.
Sounds accurate. I'd buy it.
What else would you add? What's a one last pro tip that people should be thinking about when they go out and try and do this?
So look, it goes back to listening to the customers, right? Make sure that you are looking at it from their perspective, you're communicating it from their perspective, that you're understanding the problem and describing the problem in the way that they do, right? So often it becomes like, we did this a couple days ago with a founder where they were having this little pig problem, the one where the last little pig goes wee 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 all the way home. It's that pig that's the problem, right? Everything in the communication was about what they were doing, and none of it was about what came from the client side. And it's so easy to do because we get so caught up in our solution, what we have to build, what we have to do, what we create for the client, that all of a sudden everything becomes centered around that. So I would say, if you have validated all these things and you know the problems are there and people are looking at it and they're still not taking the step at the end, make sure that you are showing it to them from their perspective. Make sure that you are accounting for them, their outcome in what you're positioning to them, what you're selling to them, as opposed to what we do for you. Show what happens to you and show that transformation. I think it's one of the places it goes off the rails most easily.
Isn't it amazing, Ryan, that I would say so many of life's problems and keys to success would boil down to listening and then empathizing with their position?
Not sure there are any problems that have ever been solved in reality without doing those two things, Ed.
That's it for us today. Appreciate those of you in the audience. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we kindly request, do the YouTube thing. Like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think. Feedback is great. But most importantly, share this with someone else that you think would benefit. Another founder maybe struggling getting customers. And we appreciate you spending the time with us. Ryan, we're going to do this again next week. Looking forward to it.
Till then, amigo. See you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, guys.